Good evening and welcome to a special webcast live from the Department for Education. Our guest this evening is the Minister for Children and Families, Edward Timpson. And over the next half an hour he'll be sharing his personal experience of adoption, talking about the government's adoption reforms and answering some of the many questions we've received via email and Twitter. And if you'd like to join the conversation, it's not too late to do so. You can tweet at First for Adoption, using the hashtag #MeetTheMinister, or you can email socialmedia@firstforadoption.org.uk. But now, and without further ado, let's meet the Minister. Welcome, or should I say thanks for having us.
Well, no, thank you for coming, Chris. Thanks for this opportunity to talk to a wider audience about this really important subject.
As I said, we've got a whole load of questions, but I think as we're meeting you, it would be rude to dive straight in very work-orientated questions. I'm interested in obviously doing my homework and looking at your CV. A constant in your professional life, first as a barrister and now obviously as a politician, has been working with children and families. So can I ask you, where did that come from? What does family mean to you?
Well, I suspect we all have our own family experience that we draw from, which helps shape our view of what family means. But for me, I was brought up in a family who fostered as well as adopted. So I was the third of the three children that my parents had. My mum couldn't have any more children after me, but still had this innate desire to want to care for more children. So she started fostering, and we ended up adopting two of those children. One when he was about 7. Oliver, and Henry when he was still quite a little baby. And that's shaped a lot of my views about the importance of family, but also the stability and security that adoption has brought my two brothers, and thinking about if they hadn't had that opportunity, what sort of lives they would have had. So that's really driven my ambition to make sure that those parents who, like mine, want to become adoptive parents, that we make it as easy as possible to match them with children who are out there, who we know are still looking for that loving, stable family home that we gave ourselves.
That makes a lot of sense. And what do you think you've learned from your adopted siblings?
Well, I learned a lot of swear words very early on when they came from homes where there had been a lot of damage and a lot of abuse and neglect. But I also learned that inside everybody there is a sort of burning desire to bring out the positives that we have, the skills, the ambition that if we give it a chance to flourish, will allow you to make the most of the life that you've been given. And early on, I must admit, I found it difficult because the age gap between me and the children that we looked after, both who we fostered and adopted, was not that great, and so there was that bit of rivalry that was going on, and a sense of jealousy as well, having to share my parents with other children. But actually, as that age gap grew and I took on more of a sort of caring role, and both in the sort of the physical way but also the emotional way, I could start to see the impact that our family and the home that we'd given them was having on them as individuals, and them starting to come to terms with their past, but also seeing a brighter future ahead. So that's something that is still driving me to make sure that it was not just my family that's in a position to do that, but many others get that opportunity too.
Okay, thank you. Let's move to work. One of the most widely reported measures outlined in last month's Queen's speech was the new legislation that means local councils must work together at a regional level to deliver adoption services. What's the thinking behind that?
Well, first of all, I think it's right to remember that we have made great strides on adoption in the last 5 years or so. We've managed to improve the assessment process, make it shorter and more focused on what actually matters. We've made sure that we have improved the amount of adopters who are being brought in to the adoption system who want to be matched with a prospective adopted child. We've improved the court process, so that's been shortened. The whole care system through the courts has improved, and we've seen as a result more children adopted, risen from about 3,000 in 2010 to about 5,000 in the latest figures. And that's not just the figures, those are individual children whose lives are now in a better place than they were before the reforms. But we still have work to do, and one of the areas we're trying to tackle is the fragmentation that there still is in the adoption system. So we have 152 councils who all have an adoption agency, and we have another around 25 to 30 voluntary adoption agencies who are also working hard to try and recruit adopters to match children and provide support. But they're doing it on sometimes a very small scale, and the artificial boundaries that often local government creates is not helping to match children quickly enough, not allowing the whole pool of adopters that are out there waiting to be looked at by every local authority. So what regional adoption agencies will do, and we're already starting to see it happen in places like Warrington, Wigan and St Helens in the northwest, in my area, who've come together and created a single agency. In the northeast, I know they're working hard to do something similar. The Tribe Borough here in London, and also where voluntary adoption agencies are working closely with councils, so like Coreham, who are working with Kent and Cambridgeshire, and Harrow and other parts of the country. It's something that we want to see emerge naturally. But of course, where it isn't happening, or there is a reluctance to engage in this new approach, then we want that backstop power to ensure that we can bring about that greater scale, which is all about trying to improve the system for the benefit of children and adoptive parents, so that children where adoption is right for them, they get matched more quickly with the right placement for them, with the right support in place. And I think that's something that everyone should welcome.
Thank you. Also last month, the Adoption Support Fund, the ASF, was launched as a national initiative. It became available to adopters throughout England. Can you just explain, for those who don't know, what exactly is it, who's eligible for it, and what kind of help does it offer? That's 3 questions, sorry. Yeah. What is it?
Well, the Adoption Support Fund is a national fund, a new fund that we've set up for the first time, which is trying to ensure that anyone who adopts has got the support that they need to make sure that that is a successful placement. And what struck me, not only the time that my parents adopted, when therapy wasn't really anything that was heard of, let alone readily available, is that if Oliver in particular, the 7-year-old who came to live with us, who was the more damaged because of his early life experiences, is that if he had had access to that type of therapeutic support, I'm convinced that some of the problems, the issues that still surface for him even now, 30 years later, would not be as acute if he'd had that support in place. So that's where the adoption support came from. And it's now being rolled out across the country since May. We've trialled it very carefully to make sure it works for adoptive parents as well as children who will receive that support. And the way to access it is there is a way that you can, in law, ensure that you get an assessment by your council as to what your support needs are. And once you have that assessment, then your council can come to the support fund. We put almost £20 million into it, of which I think already 1 million has been accessed by families who have applied for support, so that you can get it quickly, but also it's not being prevented from being brought together in a package because you're having to access it from different points. It's coming through one central fund around therapeutic support, so whether it's play therapy, music therapy, psychotherapy, anything that really starts to tackle some of those underlying emotional and mental issues that we know trauma comes with. And that's one of the things that adoptive parents have told me again and again they most value and would also want to know in advance is available, so that they make that really big commitment to adoption in the full knowledge that they'll get the support that they need.
Great. Well, on the subject of the ASF, we've had an email from Scott Casson-Rennie. He's an adoptive dad, he says, and he says, how can we ensure that adoptive parents are being given speedy access to the ASF, and if they're not and need to have someone look into it, how do they do this?
Well, I think that's a really important part of getting this right, because we know every week, every month that goes by when the support isn't in place is an opportunity missed to try and address some of these underlying issues which can bubble back up again at any point if they're not dealt with as early as possible. The way that we've designed the support fund is that it sits within existing regulations around adoption, so it shouldn't have to duplicate any work. It should provide a speedy response as possible. And we've also made sure that every authority has to have an adoption support advisor who is there on hand to troubleshoot effectively if there are any issues. And ultimately, if things aren't happening well enough, then we have elected members, we have local councillors, we have a local authority complaints procedure which you can follow. But also, I want to know and the department want to know where adopters feel the system isn't working well enough to access that support in a timely manner, because it's only by getting that information, and maybe through the First for Adoption website is a good forum for exchanging that, we can start to build up a picture of whether this adoption support fund is really doing what we set out for it to do, which was speedy, focused support when it's needed, in the way that it's needed.
Another email from Claire. She says, the adoption support fund is really good news for adopters. My local authority is applying for a specialist assessment for my older child, and I'm hoping that any therapy identified will be funded in this way too. What are the longer term plans for the fund? Will it still be available in a few years' time if my younger child also needs support?
Well, clearly we've set up the fund because we believe it is desperately needed by many families out there, and some of the early assessments and applications to the fund, and also the success that we're starting to see, the feedback we're getting, suggests that it's being hugely valued. And because of that, I will, as ever, be pressing hard to make sure, not just in the short term, but in the medium and long term as well, this is the type of support that we can continue to offer. We have these wonderful things in government called spending reviews, where we have to try and justify every penny that's spent of public money. And we have to sort of wait to see what the outcome of that is before we can see a sort of the longer term picture. But I'm clear that this is a really important initiative. The Prime Minister is very supportive of it. And now that we're starting to see families directly benefiting from what it's bringing, then I'm confident that we can make a strong case at national as well as local level to ensure that the fund can continue to provide exactly the type of therapy that we know many families are crying out for, and will make the difference between whether it's a successful adoption or not.
Thank you. Moving on, siblings. We know there's a great need to find adoptive families for sibling groups, and also for children with more complex needs, like some of those we've just been talking about may be able to access the ASF. But the majority of people, understandably perhaps, are wanting to adopt a younger child, perhaps a single child. The younger the better often. And this is a kind of mismatch which leaves approved adopters sometimes with lengthy waits to be matched. What do you think we can do to tackle this?
Well, you're right. There's still I think some myths around adoption that we need to dispel. That it's not just babies that are adopted. There are children of all ages, as you say, sibling groups, children who have particular challenges, who may have a disability, but they all deserve the same, which is a loving, stable family home to go to. And actually, if someone is wanting to adopt and they make that sort of brave leap into an agency, it's important that they get the opportunity to see all the opportunities that are out there to do just that. And they may have a preconceived idea of the type of child that they want to give a family to. But we know through our plans to widen out the access to the National Adoption Register, so adopters can see for themselves more children, through the National Adoption Activity Days, which have been very successful, that's helped change some prospective adopters' perception of actually what it was that drove them to want to adopt in the first place. And that's where those other children that weren't initially in their thoughts suddenly become centre stage. So I think by opening up the system to prospective adopters, letting them see for themselves, both through information but also with more direct access and contact, the whole range of children who are looking for an adoptive family, then we can find a match for those who perhaps would be more difficult to find that match for if we didn't have that different approach. And as we sit here today, we've got over 3,000 children who are in care, their plan is for adoption, but they're still waiting, of which over half have been waiting more than 18 months. Yet we've also managed to see an increase in the number of people who've been approved as prospective adopters rise by over a third. And our task is to try and be smarter at trying to match the two. And so it's not just increasing the number of adopters who come forward, it's also about trying to increase the diversity. And I think that's where some of the myths that do need to be busted around the sorts of people who can adopt, which is something we may discuss later in the half hour that we have. But it's making it clear that there are a whole range of children out there who, if you just give them an opportunity to show themselves and get that connection with them, then you may end up taking on a child who really does become part of your family in a way that you never imagined.
That rings true for me. I was talking to a group of adopters in Leeds a couple of months ago, and there was one lady that we spoke to who I think had been pushed rather by her husband to adopt. It wasn't something that she had thought was in her life plan, and certainly not the idea of adopting more than one child. But she went to an activity day and met siblings, and suddenly a light bulb went off in her head, and she thought, how could I possibly not adopt these two children? And she surprised herself. She couldn't rationalise it on anything, on an intellectual level. She was just, so yeah, the fact of contact is probably, as you say, the most powerful driver for that. Let's move on. We know that 2013 to 2014 saw the highest number of adoptions, 5,050, since the current data collection began. But as you say, there are still around 3,000 children waiting for a permanent home. There's also been a decline in the number of placement orders because of the way that some local authorities have interpreted recent family court judgments. And that's the background. We have an email from somebody called Rachel Howard about this. And she says, what is the government doing post REBS, a crucial case that many people watching will know about, to help restore children's services confidence in applying for placement orders?
Well, the background that you set out there is an important context, because, as you say, we did see a record rise in adoptions on the back of the reforms that we brought in to try and speed up the system, to sort of cut out all the unnecessary red tape that was in there, to have a more focused adopter assessment process, to improve matching. And it showed that there were children out there who adoption is right for them, who we were not doing well enough for, and we had made great strides in doing just that. But on the back of the REBS judgment, as it's known, there was a quite dramatic drop-off in a very short space of time, where I think a lot of councils lost confidence in knowing what they should or shouldn't do around the types of applications they should make for children who were in care, who needed a plan for permanency. And what we needed to do was make clear that actually the law had not changed at all around adoption. The tests were still the same. And we've worked very closely with the National Adoption Leadership Board, who are chaired by Sir Martin Neri, to pull together not just for prospective adopters, but for practitioners, for local councils, for those who are working in the courts, through a myth-busting guide that we pulled together to explain all of those things, and that nothing had actually changed, and there was no reason for them not to continue with the work that they had been doing previously. Now, that's going to take some time to try and correct itself. We have also seen some judgments since REBS. I think RE-R was one, possibly RE-A. They will have their own letter as someone who practiced in the courts for 10 years. There was lots of letters that I had to remember for different cases, and sometimes it wasn't always easy to get the right one. But they were important judgments because they did explain exactly what our Mythbuster has done, which is that all options have to be considered, but they have to be realistic options. And of course, where possible and it's in the best interest of a child and their welfare isn't compromised, it remains paramount, then we need to look at whether the wider family are able to offer that. But as the rise in adoptions over the last few years has shown, there is that propensity for more children to be adopted if it's properly considered and seriously considered as one of those realistic options. So I think we have more work to do. We'll be getting some more figures in the next few weeks which show since the correcting judgment and since the Mythbuster being disseminated out across the country, whether that's had an effect. But of course, we want to see those figures recover, not because we have a set amount that we think it should be, but what we do know is that there are children out there, including those 3,000 who are still waiting, where adoption is right for them. And we shouldn't be satisfied with the status quo that's been created on the back of this judgment. I think that is starting to percolate down. People are starting to understand that. Some confidence is coming back, but we need to be confident that this is not just a sort of a short-term gain. It is a long-term trend which backs up the other reforms that we've already undertaken. But we will not be resting until we're clear that everything that can be done has been done.
Good to know, thank you. Let's move on to some more emails. Mel has emailed. She says, I'd love to adopt a child, but I live in a one-bedroom council flat. I've been told that housing should be able to move me to a two-bedroom flat if I adopt, but the adoption service says they can't take me on until I have a spare bedroom. So I'm stuck. I know I'm not the only person in this position. What can you do to help?
Yeah. Well, as much as I can, I share your frustration, because there's nothing to stop you starting the process of adoption, of assessment, your adoption journey, if you want to call it that, because you haven't got a spare bedroom. Clearly, at some point, you will need to make sure that you have the right home environment for that child or those children you bring in, including a bedroom. But that shouldn't preclude you from being considered and assessed. And you have to remember that the adoption agency, in most cases, is the local authority. They're the same people who do the planning, they're the same people who do the housing, and this is a challenge to councils to show that they can communicate across different departments, something that we have to try and do here as well at national level, so that we don't miss out on the sorts of cases like this where people really want to help, but they're feeling that the system is working against them. Now, in that individual case, there must be a solution, but that has to be decided locally and they have to resolve it. But I think it raises a wider issue around how we make sure that adoption isn't something just understood by people who work in adoption. It's got to be a wider understanding, so that others who are trying to provide public services and ensure that we are able to help in every way that we can, are playing their part too, and it isn't, as I say, frustrating, something which should be embraced with open arms. If someone comes forward to an adoption agency, the first thing that should happen is they say, thank you very much, we're delighted to hear from you, how can we help you achieve your objective, which is to become an adoptive parent. And I think if there is that open gesture, not just from the adoption team, but from the housing team and from everyone else who works in local government, then these sorts of situations are less likely to arise. But I do wish them well, and hope that those problems can be resolved.
I hope that's encouraging, Mel. Kelly has emailed us too, and she says, what can be done to encourage schools to learn more about adoption so that adopted children and their families receive more empathy and a better experience at school? And can I ask you on this a supplementary question which has been echoed in a lot of emails and texts that we've received in the run-up to this webcast? Do you think that there is a role for the virtual head in helping to precipitate this process?
Yeah. Well, as you may or may not know, before I became minister, I was chairing the all-party parliamentary group on adoption and fostering, as well as one on looked after children and care leavers as too. And we did a cross-party report into how we can better support children in care. which recommended putting the virtual school head on a statutory footing, so every council has to have one, and also introducing something called the Pupil Premium Plus. So we have the Pupil Premium, it's over £2 billion a year, which goes to the most disadvantaged children to help with their education, and the Premium Plus was £1,900 a year extra for children in care to support them in their education, with that being controlled by the virtual school head so they can get the most out of it for the children in their local authority area. And part of where we go next is looking at whether there is a greater role for the virtual school head, and whether the Pupil Premium Plus, which is also something that is given to children who are adopted, so they benefit from that too, could be incorporated into the virtual school head's remit. I think we're still in the quite early stages of understanding the impact that the virtual school head, now that they are everywhere, is having, and whether the Pupil Premium Plus is delivering better support in schools for those children. But I certainly wouldn't discourage virtual school heads who want to try and help adopted children in their area. I know some already are. Windsor and Maidenhead, for example, have taken that step, and others, I'm sure, will follow suit. And we're also working with PAC UK in the Yorkshire and Humberside area to look at how we can improve support more generally for children who are adopted, who are at school. So I think this is something that we need to keep an open mind about. It's already happening sort of organically in some areas, and because we know underlying it all is that for many children who are adopted, the day they're adopted is not the day that their problems end, and they will have suffered many of the same early life experiences that children who are long-term fostered or on special guardianship orders or on the new child arrangements orders have as well. So it's sometimes not about differentiating the child out by the sort of order that they're under, but actually what are their needs. And that's being recognised, I think, by some local authorities who are expanding the role of the virtual school head. If others want to do that too, then that's fantastic, but we will be reviewing that role over time, seeing what impact the virtual school head is having, and look at whether the remit can be moved into different directions in the future.
Thank you. On to Martin, who says, what are my chances of adopting as a single man? A female friend of mine contacted an adoption agency and they said if you're single, you're less likely to be offered any children. What's the truth?
Well, I'm sorry to hear that that's the advice that's being given, because, and this goes back to the myth busting we've been talking about, is actually your chances should be no less than anyone else. You know, we have some fantastic adoptive single parents. We have people who are much older, much younger. We have more gay and lesbian couples adopted than ever before. And whatever your own family setup is actually not the most interesting feature that we should be concentrating on. It's whether you have the capacity, the motivation and the determination to offer that home to a child or children in an adoptive placement. And so the last thing I'd want to hear is anyone who wants to do that being discouraged just because they're single. And what we need to do is try and embrace more people into adoption, irrespective of what their own sort of personal background is, because families come in all shapes and forms, and ultimately it's about finding that loving, stable family home, and if you can offer it, that's great.
Hear, hear. And in terms of adoption myths, you could do a lot worse than visit the First for Adoption website, where we will be busting a number of them. We're almost at the end. And sorry if we haven't been able to reach your question this evening. I've got all the emails and some of the tweets. I'll have all of the tweets here, and I will be passing them on to the Minister afterwards, so he will see them. Can I ask you a final question, a personal question, if I may? It's Father's Day on Sunday. What does that...
isn't it?
Yeah. You get a card, there's still time. What does that mean for the Timpson family?
Well, I don't really enjoy the weeks in London in as much as I'm away from my family. I have 3 children. Sam is 11, Elizabeth is 9, and Lydia's 7. So I don't see them from Monday morning until Thursday evening, if I'm lucky to get back by then. We've discovered the world of FaceTime, So that helps to a certain extent. And I miss them terribly when I'm not there. And so Father's Day, is an opportunity for them to sort of get their own back on me in some ways, but also for us to just be together. But there's also the understanding that as a father, you're also a husband, and I'm a son, and it's realising that your role is not an individual one. It's being part of a bigger thing. And the one thing that adoption has brought to us is it's made our family greater than the sum of its parts. And that's something that still binds us together, and something that we probably, whether it's Father's Day or any other day, is touching our lives and turning us into the people that we've become. So I just hope that my experience of working in adoption and fostering and more widely in the care system will in some way trickle down to the next generation, and my own children will feel it's part of them too, and they can see the benefits of what I've been trying to do, and something that they would want to try and continue in the future in whatever shape that happens to be. But if I get a card, that's at least something.
Breakfast in bed?
Oh, no chance. No chance, no. Up and about, lots of activities to be getting on with.
Okay.
But it will be at home, which is the nice thing.
Well, that's a nice note to end on. Minister, thank you very much indeed. That is all we've got time for this evening. Thanks for watching.